What is up, everybody? This is Marshall Lee of DrJobProject.com, and tonight we are having technical difficulties. You might hear lag or something in my end. For some reason, my internet is choppy today. But we're gonna do our best to move forward, and hopefully it's a good show. If not, you know what? We'll do this again. But I have here to talk about myth and all kinds of things comic wise. Winn, who is a creator of Gods and Gears at Alterna. That's mine too. And Hammerella now, there is a link in the description, and I've been talking to you guys about it a lot lately because I'm excited about it. And yeah, Ryan, why don't you let people know a little bit about who you are and what's where can we find you as well?
I got everything except the last couple words there, but I think I know. I think you said go ahead and tell them about myself and a little bit about the book.
Yeah.
All right. So, well, my name is Ryan Winn, and that may sound familiar to you. You're like, I get this a lot. I've been an inker for years and years and years. So, lots of people, it's always funny. They just assume I'm an indie comics maker because I always did that on the side too, and that's kind of my passion artistically. Like that's where I identify as a creator personally. But I spent most of my time as an inker, did everything across the boards, all the different companies, all the different characters. And the last couple of years, I kind of turned my focus to trying out writing. It's something I've always done little bits of ever since I was a kid. You know, we all create and write and do our own things. But as I got older, I started meeting friends that were better at writing, smarter, smarter than me. And I kind of liked drawing and building things a little more. So I tend to lean towards that. But as the years go by, you know, we all get these different ideas, no matter what kind of creative person we are. You get this that, like, you know, you have all sorts of ideas for all different things. And even though I'm not specifically a writer, I started forming these ideas for these stories, and these characters started really coming to the forefront in my imagination, like pushing themselves forward, like they really wanted me to pay attention to them and do something with them. So years and years ago, I came up with the first ideas for Gods and Gears, and it was called something else. Then it was called Driver and Shotgun. And Dean Kotz and I started formulating that idea, and we spent a few years working it out, or a couple years working out the details slowly, because it was just a side project, you know, something we would every couple months, excuse me, every couple months we'd get together and work on it or talk about it. And then Alterna did their newsprint debut, and we were like, "Ooh, what's this?" And we turned our focus to, like, okay, let's get this published with Peter Simeti, because this is the perfect venue for our sort of 80s inspired adventure story that we've got going on. Is a publisher that's specifically focused on sort of that. I don't know how you'd say, but that perspective of comics, or that angle of comics. So we put together the mini series for Gods and Gears, and now I've got the spin-off Hammerella. Well, I shouldn't say it's a spin-off. It's an extended universe story. So it's a one and done 48-page color story. I'm actually doing the art and the writing on this, so that Dean can push forward on the regular Gods and Gears series. And this is about Hammerella, as you see on the screen there. And she is half witch, half god. And she's been stranded on this, like, horrible, horrendous planet called the Garden of Umbra since she was a little wee baby. And she's found the way to survive. And there's these horrible beasts that go hunting her. And I've shown some of the pages, and we have examples on the Indiegogo. She gets hunted by these horrible beasts, and she's just got to toughen up to survive. And by the time she reaches adulthood, she finds her way off the planet. And the first time she actually meets other people, she finds herself in the midst of this galactic war. And so we're going to get introduced to this rogue naval squadron that she teams up with, and we're going to get introduced to these new mechs that we've got, or mecha, whatever you want to call them. We call them the Mecha Kira. They're our giant killer robots, and that's one of my favorite aspects of this book is getting to do some of the kind of tech work I've never really got to do. I mean, I've gotten to do plenty of stuff in comics, but for myself, the drawing stuff, I've never actually had like a I want to draw giant robots project. Like I've done some like transformer box design and some things like that here and there, but that's just commercial work and stuff. So this time I'm really excited about this. I had Dean help me out with the designs for them. Excuse me. And yeah, so this is kind of working as an annual for Gods and Gears. It's in the same universe. These characters will eventually meet up with our Earthbound characters, Eli and Jimmy, way down the line. But this is just, like I said, it's 48 pages, but it is non-stop action. But it's still got a lot of heart, just like the regular Gods and Gears series. So if you like that aspect of Gods and Gears, we still have that. There's going to be some great characters, some heartfelt moments. We're going to try to tug at your heartstrings a little bit. It's going to be fun.
That's what I'm in it for, man. Tug my heartstrings, please. um, yeah, I mean this project looks amazing.
Thank you.
How is the sound of my voice? Is it okay, or is it still spotty?
It's has a slight effect, but you're coming through, like words are coming through, sentences are coming through.
Okay, well, I tried to turn stuff off. I'm still kind of trying to, but let me see if I can get a few questions out, and that way, at least if you're talking, it'll sound good.
All
um,
right.
but I really think Gods and Gears is such a cool story, and I'm really looking forward to Hammerella because obviously it's going to be more in the same kind of vein um, as that, and uh, you know I think like I said, in the if you read the title, I was talking about like mining mythology, and obviously you've dug into that, and you kind of have created your own mythology, and it's pretty cool because it's funny because it seems like there's a lot of Alterna creators who are really doing that. There's a lot of world in a lot of these comics. I think about Blood Realm, Robert Geronimo, and yours, and some other ones. Really a lot of the other ones that I've read as well. There's you could tell there's a big world in there, and it's really fun to kind of explore that. I know as a creative person, it's fun to explore that as well, and the research that kind of goes into it. I'm curious, I guess, where did kind of when it comes to the mythology type of thing, did you specifically try to get some stuff analogous from known myths, or did you just kind of get inspired by those myths and then just it seems like you kind of created your own um, type of thing?
Yeah, I you came through clear on all that, by the way. Um,
Oh, good.
it was perfect. So no, those are excuse me. That's a fun question because uh, the one of the major fun parts for me about doing all of this stuff is the research and then like page layouts. Like those are my two absolute favorite kind of aspects of creating comics. So the research, I could get lost in, like if I could get paid to just do research, which I know people can't. If I could somehow, that would be great because it's a lot of fun for me. Um, and the sort of mythology in Gods and Gears, I didn't try to make anything like purposefully or directly analogous. I don't try to have any like, oh, this character is this character. Yes, we have a god in the group of Elementiums. We have a demigod with a hammer, but he's not Thor. He's not analogous to Thor, other than when we were designing him. Part of the characteristics were like, what do we like visually that makes things cool to us? And they were weapons like the baseball bat, the club, a spear, a hammer. Like so we have similarities in those visual aspects, and maybe a couple just aspects in the fact that they're demigods and gods, and we're dealing with that sort of, are they aliens or are they other dimensional, or are they kind of a combo of both kind of creatures? So in that aspect, there are similarities in characters, but then with the mythology, it all kind of started. It all, just like with so many of us, it goes back to Jack Kirby, and I really liked his ideas when I was a kid. It was the first place I had anyone, how do I say this? It was the first place in literature where somebody presented the idea to me that somebody had come to Earth and manipulated the world a little bit, or humans, or whatever it is. And then I found out that, like, oh, Kirby's basing these ideas on things he's reading about. So then I go and read those things, and then you're studying Joseph Campbell, and you're expanding into all these things, and you're I'm forgetting some of the modern philosophers that I've studied that really have explored things about, like, the Younger Dryas period and things happening like 10,000 years ago with comet strikes on our planet, and a lot of those things, they informed me. I wasn't actually necessarily mining them, or I didn't know at the time that I was mining them. They were just things that I found interesting to take in, and then as I started forming this story, that's when I realized I could go mining in these things for story ideas and inspiration. And so there are a lot of parallels, but I do try to spend a lot of time to make something unique in its own way. So even when I hit on a trope, because I love comic book tropes, even in Gods and Gears, we have the gorillas in the series, or the gorilla creatures, if you want, whatever you want to call them, the Thunder Bros.
The war.
Yeah, because that's the potion that sort of, it's from these people called the Warrill. It's all this stuff from the past that has found its way into the, I don't know, our stories present. But even then, they're a twist on a kid being raised by apes and Cinderella, kind of combined, and Jungle Book a little bit. Like, there's aspects of story mythology, like modern story mythology, that I'm drawing from as well and mixing into that. And that's the fun part of the Gods and Gears for me, is there's a macro story that spans millions of years, dealing with these gods and demigods and war witches and all these crazy things we're coming up with. And then there's a micro story that's this family down on Earth and things that they're going through, and their new friend Jimmy and Eli's relationship. But then the cool thing is, you mash those together and you start to find, like, oh, the God story is all about family dynamics too. Oh, cool. And then you start to find the way that these stories, like, just like Gears, not to no pun intended, but they start interlocking in ways, and it almost started threading itself together at some point. So while it was a labor to put the story together, there were points that, like, all of that mining paid off, like, studying and researching all that stuff and letting it permeate with your own ideas and your own theories and things like that. And that's kind of where we landed with the Gods and Gears mythos. And hopefully I'll have a Bible laid out of it sometime, that thick book that really explains it all, because it's starting to get really deep, the lore. And especially now with Hammerella and the way she's going to be tied to the Gods and Gears series, I was having to do math for like 10,000 years. Does this work that? Okay, what about, okay, but then there's a million years that this was happening. So if so that's all new to me, because I didn't start off wanting to be a lore creator. Like, I didn't want to create this world. Like, it's all happened sort of organically.
So how long would you say was the preparation process before you were, like, ready to finally make this into a story? Or I should say, like, create the comic, I should say.
It was a few years in the process, because it took a few different forms. So the original idea started in 2012 with a print that I made. And it was a print of these characters called Driver and Shotgun, who we see at the very beginning of Gods and Gears 1. And I was basically trying to do prints at conventions that weren't copywritten characters, but something that looked as exciting, like something that looked like you knew it from a long time ago, but is actually new to you. So I came up with my character Death Betty, which we have an indie comic that's available on Comixology. And at the same time, I came up with this Driver and Shotgun character. And excuse me, they were just a print. That was it. And I'm sure you've done that. You just draw a character. You're like, hey, I got a character. Cool. Like that's what they are. They're a character on paper, and that's it. And then I'm selling the prints at cons, and people are having fun with them. I was pretty active in the con scene back then, so I was having a lot of fun and great interactive fans. And people were asking stories about these characters, and sometimes they'd say, make something up on the spot if you don't got something. So I'd start, shooting something out, just shooting from the hip and spitting stuff out and having fun with that and coming up with all these different ideas. And then it was, flying home or driving home from the convention. You're like, man, people, they loved the visual, but they wanted to know the characters. That's what was like, the visual drew them in, but I realized they needed something to grab onto. They need to like the character, whether they're bad and interested, like it's a bad guy and they're interested and they're interested in that evil, or a good guy and they want that, whatever it is. They needed something to bite into on that. And I couldn't help thinking of that. And I just started formulating the story. And first it was really small. It was a racing story. It was a parallel universe history of racing. And I was just studying the history of racing, and I was having so much fun with that, like the old track racing that they did at the turn of the century. And my dad, I grew up, my dad taking me to the racetracks, the auto races. And we even had a friend that raced Porsches professionally for years and years. So I spent my childhood in the pits at these racetracks. So I've always been I love the aspect of racing, and I just wanted to bring that into comics. But then it started to almost feel like I was just doing a documentary, I'll give it an interesting visual to a Ken Burns documentary about racing. And it felt like, I don't know, I wanted to do something big and comic booky and still superhero-y. So then they became stunt racers. And then we kind of came up with the aspect of like a larger world that they're part of, with magic and machines that work in different ways. And that's when I brought Dean in. I had started the idea myself, and I was like, this is beyond me as an artist. I have to bring in a friend and a pro like Dean, who can basically, Dean can handle anything you throw at him, where I'm really experienced and I'm great at layouts and storytelling. But say one of the Hammerella pages we showed there, where she's being chased by a big flaming bird and she's falling. There's a page with cliffs, and she's falling between these cliffs. It took me way longer to draw cliffs because I've never actually myself, I've inked a bunch of cliffs by dozens and dozens of other artists, but myself, I didn't draw them. So I had to go into my sketchbook and like, how do I draw cliffs? How do I do that? Where Dean is so trained and so practiced and so experienced that you're like, here's cliffs. He's like, all right, this is how I draw cliffs. And you're like, here's a waterfall. He's like, here's how I do a waterfall. Here's a giant clouds and a spaceship. And he's like, I know how to do that. So, and that's what I needed. And it's fun to collaborate too. It's a great medium for that because there are separate tasks. It's not like if you're both working on the same painting in a room or something. It's like, no, you have one thing aspect you're doing and the other. So it's fun to collaborate. I don't know, did I stray? I feel like I might have strayed.
No, it's good. Yeah, no, it was interesting because you're talking drawing the cliffs and stuff, and I always wonder, people who are primarily inkers, obviously they draw too, like, and I remember once in a while seeing like a drawing from from like Scott Williams or something, and I'm like, oh yeah, he can draw too, right? Like,
Hmm.
and like, so I wondered, it's interesting though, like those random things that you don't typically draw, but like you said, you ink them sometimes. Do you feel like, and this is a stray from the whole conversation too, but do you feel like having done so much inking in your time, has that helped you become a better drawer, like penciler?
Excuse me. Yes and no. Um, there's always times where I wish, just like everything in life, you regret one thing one day, and the next day you feel the opposite. You seesaw on things. So there are definitely times where I wish I had focused as an illustrator or a penciler just on bettering myself as that, instead of focusing on inking, because I went die hard on inking. Um, there were years where, I mean, 2 years would go by and I would draw two things because
Mm,
all I was doing was inking other people's work. And part of that was to pay the bills, part of that was to grow your name and doing the things that the older guys were telling you to do, like how to do it and this or that. And the guys that I had trained and worked with, they didn't have that much time for drawing either. It was ink, 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 ink. So part of me feels like I'm a few years behind where I could be as an illustrator on my own. Um, but then when I look at the flip side of that, which you have to always weigh your options, especially as a creative person. Otherwise, if you're only looking at the whiny dark side, you just fall down that. But the flip side is, um, I got to experiment with all kinds of textures, leaves, trees,
mm,
buildings, and even when you're talking buildings, when you're inking backgrounds on like a David Finch or somebody like that, you're getting these glossy skyscrapers, and then you're getting these gritty buildings in Queens and stuff like that. So you're getting all this experience. So that's something that I fully appreciate, and often in my own pieces, I can bring in these ideas that, like, my work is very clean in a sense. It's my personal work. It's thick brush strokes. It's open, a lot of air to my pieces. But sometimes I can bring in like certain textures or designs that like add to that specific piece, and that's usually something I learned along the way, inking
mm,
others. And
yeah.
then also you just learn, like when you're inking like really good pencilers, you start to learn about like, oh, where'd they put their perspective, where'd they put their vanishing point here, which
Mm,
you can get that from studying the pages too. But when you're inking it, like guys like Sylvester or the guys at like the Top Cow Studio, they were so meticulous with their perspective grids that when you're looking at their originals, they are gridded up. So
oh,
I
wow.
learned so much. Like when I inked with Danny Mickey for years and years, learned tons of stuff, and then when I jumped over to Top Cow, I learned so much more about perspective. Where I was like, I came in, I'm like, yeah, I got this experience, I got it, and they were all talking about like, oh well, the math on 3 point perspective because they know exactly what angles to put it at. So you get your three things and everything, and they all do because Mark would teach everyone. They come in, you boom, 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 you learn this stuff because that's important. Um, so that's something I would not have had on my own. And perspective is still, it's one of the tougher aspects for me to understand. Like it plays tricks on my eyes, things like that. Um, but luckily, I had some training there, and can use that. So there's huge benefits. It's usually just when I'm having trouble drawing or frustrating or erasing and erasing that I'm like, why did I spend so long tracing other people?
Well, yeah, I feel like if you knew before, like that your goal maybe might be to do the illustration eventually, maybe you, like, I feel like I could see where you're saying, okay, I was doing the inking. The craft of inking is an important thing, and it's like it's, but I could see how it would be like, oh man, if I knew that I would probably want to do illustration later on, I might have specifically as I was inking, think a little more about some of the stuff. But it sounds like you got a lot from it as is. I mean, that's the type of stuff that I would think would be helpful to learn because when I'm like, okay, I gotta draw a jungle scene, I gotta draw this scene, I'm like, how did McFarlane draw bushes? How did Kirby draw bushes? How like I start going through my comics, like, because I don't want to draw every leaf. That looks like a pain in the ass. There must be a better way to draw a crowd scene than what I'm about to do. Like, you know, so all that stuff must be really helpful.
Yeah, and that's something that one of the benefits I had when I started working with Danny, and this is something I recommend everyone does. I should probably do a video on it or something. Is go pick out some Ditko, go pick out some Kirby, go pick out old school John Buscema and pick out some new school John Buscema, then pick up some like Walt Simonson and Neil Adams, and then pick up some Carl Potts and Jim Lee, and then pick up some Jim Lee Scott Williams, and you go through those and you're laying those out and you're looking at them and you start to see like the history of the super fist coming at you, and you're like, oh wait, so I always loved the way Neil Adams did that. I didn't realize Neil Adams was looking at so and so was looking at so and you can trace all these things back, these aspects. And so that was something. It was kind of like a trip. It was like, oh whoa, like it was like mind-boggling to see, because like as an artist you kind of think like everything should be totally original, everything that comes from me should be so original and this or that, and you're like, no man, in the world of comics it's all about like, oh hey man, that flying fist at the screen you did, at the camera you did, was great, I need to do it my way, and then the next guy needs to do it his, and it's about taking what worked and was powerful, because it's like music. It's like, oh, they used to play 3 chords in rock and roll music. Okay, I'm gonna do the same thing, but I'm gonna use distortion. I'm gonna yell about something, and now we're a punk band. It's still, but it's still this similar thing, and you can see the growth. Like you can see how oldies became rock and roll, became the Misfits. Like
Right.
there's trajectory there. So I recommend people do that. Like young artists or old artists, it's a really fun aspect. We have it all on our shelves. Collectors, we have it all. So just go and pull out these generations and kind of like study and see, and you'll kind of start to learn the language better of comics too, because that's what it is. It's a language that you got to speak, and you're looking at these guys that like Walt Simonson didn't make it all up, but he perfected so much of what had come before him. Just like Michael Golden did a certain amount, and then Art Adams kind of like was like, oh, I can kind of be like that and take it off in this direction and keep getting crazier and crazier with the style and more expansive with the details and hatching and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So once again, I don't know if I've answered your question or straight off.
No, we're on this tangent together, kind of like Gods and Gears. They go on an interesting tangent, that's for sure. And so there's so many different places that I'd like to go here. This always happens to me, like which way do I go? But kind of going back to like the mythology stuff, and really, the world building, like I don't know, like I guess I'm curious because you did kind of get into it, but I'm curious, like what how did you like decide, because this is the part that I struggle with personally. There's a comic I've been working on, Glyph. It's a graffiti artist whose art comes to life, and I started making mini comics, just as silly little ideas and stuff. And now I've like written and rewritten because I want to like make a proper comic of it. Like, and I'm like, I can't decide. Like he's had so many different iterations, and the world has gotten bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's like, so when did you like come to a point where you're like, okay, I need to start making some decisions here and let's do this,
Yeah, it was probably like a year before we submitted. It was probably around 2015. So like I said, I had the initial idea 2012, and then it started just burbling and percolating in the back as creative things do. And then, yeah, it was around 2015 I started doing the first few pages, and I realized it was too much for me. And I was out in New York, and I met up with Dean Kotz, who's in New York, and he was he was in because we had been old friends from like the Deviant Art days from way back years and
Wow.
years ago. We'd always wanted to work together, and I always told him, I was like I'm not really a writer, but I have some ideas, and you're the only artist. You're the first artist I want to work with, not necessarily the only, but you're the first I want to work with. And he was always down. He liked my work. He liked my ideas. And then when I presented this story to him, um, he clicked on every level with it. He liked all the ideas, and at this point, I had the gods thought out. I had what happens to Jimmy thought out, because like I said, it had started just as a racing thing, and it was going to be all racing, and then lo and behold, page 5 or 6 or whatever, things start going a little different, and the we make a literal jump into a different direction uh, for the story. So we had all that thought out, but it was still a smaller story. But we felt like we had enough. We had a beginning and an end, and we had a little bit of a trajectory for a story. It was a slightly different path, but so it was, yeah, about on the 3-year mark of just letting it all bubble together. Once I had the ending worked out, that's when we started pushing forward, because it just felt
Mhm.
like, oh, okay, we know where we're going now. And we also wanted to kind of have a spontaneous aspect to it. So we wanted to have the ending in mind and then start production and like do an issue and then be like, okay, so where did that issue take us? And let's do this with the next issue. Because we wanted to still sort of mimic how the comics we loved in the as kids in the 80s were made, where those things were not crafted like um, for years at a time, someone just sitting there thinking, how am I going to do this? It was Claremont in an office with his editors acting things out, and he's got to figure it out and type it up, and he's got to get this idea down, and is this going to work? Is this dramatic enough? Okay, and then he's got to rush that script to the penciler, and they got to, and they're working out these ideas like weeks at a time. So we wanted to have a little bit of an aspect of that. So 3 years of thinking, an ending worked out, push through the first issue, and then see where
Mhm.
we are, and then just kind of repeat as we went through. So
So did
um,
you have the ending of the full 4-issue arc worked out, or you had the ending of the first book worked out?
had the ending of the 4-issue arc worked out. So I
Okay.
knew how I wanted it to end, and I kind of gave us uh, basically kind of a direction to go and things to collect along the way. It almost has that video game aspect to it. Um, so yeah, it was yeah, advice I kept getting from writers was just don't do anything till you have the ending. Like
Mm-hmm.
you've got to have your ending to go forward with. And obviously any creative advice is subjective to it. Who's giving it, taking it, how you feel about it. And you should explore all aspects. But for us, that felt like the good way to go for this, that it was work on those ideas, but then once we had an ending that we thought was cool, then just push forward with what we had and kind of organically let a lot of stuff come up. And there was a lot of stuff that came up that was big story points that I don't think would have happened if we had meticulously planned out everything, you know?
Mm-hmm.
But we do get really meticulous about our storytelling. We get our panel to panel work, we get really nitty gritty on that. And we kind of had to because it's 9 panel based.
Okay, so that's interesting actually. It's not, yeah, it's 9 panel based except for the first 5 pages or so.
Oh
But
yeah.
yeah, just because I'm looking through it and remember, like, but yeah, that's interesting though, because you really the way you talk about it, it sounds, like collaborative process of it is like, it's like it sounds like the lines maybe are blurred. Like, yes, in the credits it says you wrote the words and the script, and he did, the art, but it kind of sounds like there's some blurring in there. So I'm curious about the process, because you say that, you know, the storytelling is something that was a little more meticulous. What is that a little bit like say working on a page with the artist, Dean Kotz?
Yeah, so we usually have a discussion on like what do you want to draw this issue? Do you want to do you want a lot of fight scenes? Do you want something an emotional scene to work on? Like kind of what do you feel? Because even though we have the overall story thought out, there's different paths you can take to kind of make that story happen. So I always want to make sure that whatever we're working on, it's what he wants to draw, because he gets enough
Hmm.
scripts that are just draw what I want, draw what I want. You know, that's how that is. And this is crafted for him to draw. So, you know, I want to get all those aspects in first, and then yeah, I'll literally work out like I don't know, how do we do it? Like a page synopsis. Like I'll think out everything for the issue, and I'll break it down into a page, and I'll send that to him, and he'll look over at it. And I'd say on average, he usually has like 5 or 6 points that are spot on. I should redirect, or this is wrong, or you know, he's really good. He's a great storyteller, and he's a great understander and a student of story. Like he's always referencing books that I should be checking out on writing multiple acts and things like that. And so he'll come back and remind me about like, oh, is this character's motivation like this, or is this pushing us this way? So we'll go back and forth like that a couple times until I send it, and it's usually the third or fourth one, and I get a 2 thumbs up from him, and then I go forward and I break it down page by page, and I do little thumbnails. I have oh, I don't have it within reach, but I have a little thing that's almost, it's a template that's almost business card size. That's the proportions of a comic page. And in my sketchbook,
Okay.
I just trace those out, and then I do these little thumbnails, and then I can usually see like 6 to 9 pages at a time and kind of paste things out that way. Then I
Oh,
send those to
interesting.
him, and he'll let me know what he thinks about it, and then I just send it off to him, and he works his magic with it. Because these are serious like stick figure thumbnails. Like I'm talking about like uh, in this panel, here's a circle, and that's a circle, and that's 2 people talking. Like I'm not actually doing a layout for him like perspective and you know where characters should
Yeah.
be. I'm just like 2 characters in here, then we'll do a close up, then we'll pull back to see everything. So I'm just kind of like making sure what I want to say works on the page before I send it to him. So I'm not uh, putting too much uh, in one panel or anything like
Hmm.
that, because that's super easy to do. It doesn't matter how experienced you are in creating. It's super easy to
Yeah.
get yourself caught in the trap of, oh, he grabs the thing and then moves it over here and it's there. And you're like, that can't happen in one panel. Um,
I've done that plenty of times to my own self, so I know.
yeah, yeah, me too, man, me too. So we want to work out all those kinks and stuff. So yeah, I send him those thumbnails just to kind of, it's more like a beat sheet. It's more like a visual beat sheet.
Yeah.
And then he does pencils. I'll approve. He does inks, and then I'll go in and do final dialogue, because I don't do final dialogue until I see his inks, because he's usually got like just a quirk to a character, or the shot's done in a certain way that I can eliminate some dialogue or exposition. Um, and yeah, I think that's basically our process from issue to issue.
Yeah. Okay. That's definitely interesting. I always love hearing about that because especially when you're actually an artist as well as a writer, like usually the process is way different than typical writers, you know. And it's cool. It's always a mishmash of art and story, even from that early process usually. Um, so
I agree.
yeah, yeah. So Another thing too is how much of this was ready and done by the time you brought it to Alterna?
Not enough. We had the entire first issue done and a good chunk of the second issue done when I proposed it to him.
Mhm.
And we were on track. I can't really remember the month. It was sometime early 2018 or 2017. I forget now, but
Right.
we were on track. And Dean and I are both really good at this will be done on this day when we're doing our schedules, and we kind of know how long things will take. So we knew exactly how things were going to go. And then a bunch of things in my life went wrong, and a bunch of things in his life went wrong, and we got delayed by like 6 or 8 months.
Oh no.
But luckily, we were able to. We made each issue, and they were basically what we wanted. There was only a couple like panels or pages, and that was it. Most of the things we sacrificed were just because we had more ideas and more that we wanted to put in the story than the 30 pages per issue could contain.
Yeah.
And
Well, I
we
noticed.
pushed it on every issue. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was noticing that actually. I'm like, usually alternative books have advertisements in them, and these don't seem to have many advertisements, if any at all. And it's just from cover to cover, and the book feels a little thick. I'm like, I think they really need to be this thing out.
Yeah, that was a result. That's all Peter Samedi's. It's his own fault. He So in our original series, they were shorter issues, and I had 5 of them, and it was more like it was more analogous to the Wizard of Oz. Like the boys were going to go from like point to point and like collect things and learn about things in a different way. And the gods aspect of the story was an 8-page part in one issue. Like they were going to learn about something and this or that. And what's funny is in the beginning, Dean was like, this aspect is really interesting. And I was like, well, I know, but that's not what the story's about. So I'm glad it's super interesting. I want there to be things in the story that people want to learn more about, whether we explore it or not. That's what I love. I love when there's a movie or a book or something, and I'm like, man, I wonder what's up with that racing team of punks. Like they just met, they were in
Yeah.
one scene, they came in and did some crazy stuff, but like, oh man, it's going for me. It's fun to think about it, whether the creator ever explores it or not.
Right.
And then Peter got to that part of the story, and he was like, man, this stuff is so cool. How can you contain it to 8 pages, man? And then also we kind of had to condense to 4 issues from 5, because at the time getting a 5th issue pushed through Diamond was like nigh impossible. Like you could always
Um,
get some sales on that 4th issue, but 5th issues just were tough. So we were like, all right, how can we contain it? So then we thought of the prologue idea. And we were like, okay, so we'll just do a prologue in each story. And then, man, that was the hardest creative task I've ever had. And part of that's because this was my first big writing experience. So I didn't have I didn't have anything except drawing and inking and painting and writing music to build this off. So like trying to figure out how to visually and thematically tie the prologues into the story each time, like man, it gave me a new respect for writers. Like I already had ultimate like respect for some of these writers, but um just looking at how hard it was for me to do 1 page of something that like Chris Claremont does in his sleep, like the way he can resonate like emotion and drama and humor and entertainment, like and just do it page after page, and he did it for year after year and issue after issue. And here I was like, oh, I only have 4 of these. I just got to get through 4 of these. How did this guy do it month after month?
yeah.
Um, and then when we were done with the 4th, I was like, okay, I don't know if I could write anymore. That was but wait, I have new ideas. Oh no, it's not done. And then Peter was like, how would you like to go ongoing? And I was like, I think we're going to have to. I think that's the nature of this book, is to roll with the punches, adapt to the environment and the situation we're put in. And so far it's benefited from that. I think if we had planned this whole giant thing, as soon as we would have failed a little bit, this entire thing would have crumbled. But we started and we were like, hey, let's build a hut. And then someone's like, nah, make it a little better, like support, a little support. And I'm like, all right, cool, we'll do a support. And then someone's like, add a second star. Okay. And we just kind of kept adding to it as it went, but being very mindful of the superstructure underneath that we were building as we went. And now that we know we've got this giant world and these giant myths to explore and to these stories to tell, it's a little more fun and a little less daunting than it was in the beginning. And that may just be I've gotten through those 4 or actually 5 issues, counting it came out on a Wednesday. It might be I've gotten through that, but it might also just be by going through that we built this structure that like exists, and like, oh, okay, I'm comfortable on this. Like, so Hammerella was easy, man. Like, and I don't mean easy like, oh, I'm not even trying or anything, but she came to me, her story came to me. When I showed it to Peter, I didn't even have to tell him. All the same ideas from him came. He was like, how about this? I was like, yep, I'm there. Same ideas. Her artwork came to me, her jingle, her music, like everything. She was just like pushing herself to the front, man. Just like, I need to exist. And then the way we were able to tie it into the story, it's just, it's been really fun. And I don't think it would have all worked out if we'd had some big scheme from the beginning. I don't think it would have worked.
Yeah, totally.
Not that people shouldn't have big schemes.
Yeah.
So many, like, I love it. Like, but just for us in this series, it's been the best approach, is to kind of accidentally stumble into it being a big series.
Right. So yeah, I don't know. I guess what was there, like, I know you said like Hammerella just kind of came. Were you fishing for an idea, or like how did you stumble upon this Hammerella idea?
I had drawn. It was just a straight up drawing. Just a drawing in my sketchbook. It started just figure drawing, and then I just kind of started adding details, and it started growing, and it looked like she was holding a hammer, and I was just kind of going with it. There was no thoughts in my head. I was just drawing, and my initial thought was, oh, this is cool. It's kind of like if Monica Rambeau picked up the hammer. And I started playing with that idea for a second. I was like, okay, so who would I have wanted to pick up the hammer if someone else was gonna pick it up? Certainly not the new Captain Marvel. And it's like, but my Captain Marvel from when I was a kid was Photon, was Monica Rambeau. And there was about an hour of playing with that, and then I was like, nah, she looks too cool. This needs to be one of my characters. Like, why would I want to waste time thinking about something for some other I don't want to do fanfic for Marvel characters or anything like that. So yeah, that lasted about an hour, but the design came to me. It was all about an hour. It was just figure drawing. I was just hanging out drawing after like a day of doing some commissions and stuff. I just sat down, let's just draw, and the mindlessness led to that. And then a couple days later I started talking to Peter about it, and he was like, oh, what about this, and the ideas started going. And then, like I said, her story came to me that easy, where it was a struggle to craft the story, just like any creative process, but the ideas for it, like, I mean, man, Gods and Gears took years of going for walks and thinking about stuff and reading, and praying and thinking and wishing and hoping and all this stuff. Where no joke, it was like with her stuff, it's just been like, blah, like just coming out. Like I can't stop it. Um, and I know not every creative project will be like that. So just as a warning to young creators, that'll happen sometimes with projects, and you'll be like,
Yeah.
oh, I must have made it creatively in the universe, and the creative gods are smiling now, and I will never have a problem creating again. Nah, you will, but sometimes you'll have these little things that just come out and they're great, and just have as much fun as you can and strike while that creative stuff while that's coming to you. Make as much use of it as possible. Pencil to paper, type
Yep.
away everything like while it's coming to you.
Definitely. Totally. You mentioned about having this be like it's going to become an ongoing series, and it's funny because as I'm reading it, I'm like, especially like towards the end, I'm like, there's too much here. Like this has to go on. Like, and then I was thinking like, you know, as we were just talking, what like is this, to me it seems like this could be the thing you do, like Eric Larson does Savage Dragon. That's pretty much what he does, like that. I mean, I don't know if that's what you want to do. I'm not trying to impose this thing on you. But I'm just saying it's that kind of project where it's like, I mean, I see that it's possible to just keep this thing going. What are your thoughts on that? Like, where do you guys want to go with this? How far do you think, maybe, I guess, is the question.
Well, I'd like to go at least 25 or 30 issues. It's something I wouldn't want to put myself too much into just repeating stories. I want to make sure I have uh, enough stories to tell. But just like with the miniseries, I had to come up with an ending first. So we came up with this kind of ultimate ending to the series that could happen, that we would like to happen. And now we've decided that, okay, so we can make that happen in 25 issues, or we can make that happen in 50 issues. That doesn't really matter. Now that we've got that ending in mind, we can just start going and kind of see how it feels, and see if, like, oh, you know what, maybe I only have 4 more stories in me, so we'll cap it out at 20 something, or something like that. But at the way it looks right now, we've got 5 or 6 story arc ideas, and those are all going to kind of be based, I guess this is the first time I've really talked about this, but they're going to be based on, yes, they're going to be in the Gods and Gears world. It's going to be all magic and mayhem and all this stuff. But like the next story is the heart of racing, and Eli's going to fall in love with racing, and Jimmy's going to fall in love for the first time. And we're going to go through these, like the emotional things that we go through at those ages, and the ages we're going to follow the boys through. Like the stories are all going to be heavy on that. So like the first one kind of secretly dealt with a kid that was going through his parents possibly breaking up after the death of his grandfather, and he's trying to live up into his grandfather's shoes and stuff. And that's all stuff I went through as a kid. Like, my parents' divorce, my grandfather's death, all this, and there are things that we all go through. And that's the kind of stuff like that I hope sticks to readers, because I'm not just, none of the emotional stuff that's happening to the characters. It's not anything that I'm reaching for or don't understand. It's all things that I've gone through, or very similar aspect of something like that. And yeah, so I don't know.
Yeah, that's the whole, right what thing. I mean, obviously, you don't necessarily know about, humans becoming apes and going through different portals, but you know about the emotional story part of it that you've already gone through and you can relate with. So, yeah, that's great. That's actually a pretty cool takeaway for any creators out there. Obviously, we're not. When people say that, right, what that's more what it means, I think.
Hmm.
Also, the title Gods and Gears, the world of Gods and Gears and Hammerella, is obviously an interesting mix. And again, I mentioned Blood Realm, and Blood Realm plays around with this more on the fantasy side, dark horror fantasy mixed with also there's like some kind of sci-fi techie stuff kind of
Yeah.
looming. And with this one, it's right there, right in the beginning. It's throughout. There he's explaining to him what cars are and stuff, and things like that. What's that like? Like, how did you come to that decision to kind of mix it? And I don't know, it's just a really interesting mix. Even the title, like the the minute I saw the title Gods and Gears, I'm like, I'm on board. Like, I don't even need to know what it's about. Like, I want this right now, like in my life. So, like, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, the original idea was 2012, and I had a print idea of Driver and Shotgun, and it was sort of done like a racing promo poster for them. And um, shoot, what was I gonna say about that? Um, well, anyway, so I like the aspect of driving so much, and the title was going to be Driver and Shotgun based on that initial thing. And then we started exploring the time travel aspect of the story, and it started getting bigger than just the two racing characters. But I liked that something and something, like there was that
Yeah.
kind of rhythm and cadence to the title that I still wanted to have. So one of these days I'll put it in a video or a post or something. I sort of have my word association page in my sketchbook that's just, you know, magic and machines, elixirs and evil, this and that, like da da da. And then I finally hit on Gods and Gears, and it felt like it was one of those things, like it just rang like a bell when I got to it. I was like, oh, okay, because it works on the layers of the gods affect the gears of the story of these people and their lives and all the, like, I was like, this works on so many levels, bro. Um, and
Yeah, I mean, it's an automatic cue to longtime comic book readers too, because I mean Kirby, it just makes me think of Kirby right away. Like that's what he talked about.
Yeah, definitely. And he's a huge inspiration and influence that I'll never shy away from.
Mm.
People say, "Oh, this seems like this or that." I'm like, "Cool. Yeah, hope you like it because I hope that works. And if not, I'm sorry, but that's is his influence. I don't hide it. Like those giant trees in mycelia, like the mushroom style trees with the Kirby crackle energy around them. Um,
Yeah,
what's funny is those just kind of started off as a background element, and then we were like, no, I feel like the things that are a nod to Kirby should play a more important part in literally threading this universe together. Uh,
I like the trees. They remind me automatically story-wise. They remind me of mythology because there's a lot of the great tree, in old mythology and stuff like that. And obviously the trees do play more of a role than just a background, foliage. So yeah, it was
mm-hmm.
really cool how you brought that in.
Cool. Yeah, I'm glad it's that's the thing I didn't know going into this. I was like, are all these nods going to be too heavy-handed or too jokey or too cheesy? Because there's a lot of kind of cheesiness involved in Gods and Gears, like purposeful, like Markham, the Elementium. Like he's what my 12-year-old brain would think is the coolest guy in the world. A motorcycle helmet, a cape, and a bat, and he's super powerful. Like
Yeah,
there's this purposeful like element of fun and more camp, I guess, than cheese, like that comic book
yeah,
campiness. Um, but then, like I said, we try to ground all of that in a story that tugs at your heart and keeps you thinking about stuff and makes you wonder what's going on.
yeah. I mean, when the bat came to be part of it, I was just like, I'm like, this is so cool because it's like it's so like a bat, like a mystical bat, like it's kind of super silly, but it's like, yes, like please and thank you. Like
No, there's a lot of me walking around the kitchen, like writing, like just pacing back and forth. I'm like, am I doing this? Am I? Are we doing? Is this how we're doing it? All right, this is how we're doing it. And then I'll go back and forth with Dean, and he's great because he loves that sort of challenge of like, yeah, but how can we take that dorky thing and make it super cool? Like it'll still be dorky, but it's cool. You liking it even though it's dorky. So that's kind of one of the fun angles we try to take on the story.
Yeah, totally.
But yeah, the
Yeah,
bat was a
and
whole fun. That was it was just fun. I had fun doing it. I'm glad it worked for you.
yeah, it's there's just a lot of little elements and like that. And I mean, to me, it's just there's a lot of really cool campaigns out there, a lot of cool books coming out, and I see them and I'm like, really, I dig them. But they're very like, I don't know, they're like, let's put our everything into this book. And this is not saying this is not what you're doing. But it's like, I don't know how to explain it, but it's like it's very polished and very it's like almost too amazing, and it's still good. I'm gonna read them, I'm gonna enjoy them. This book, I feel like I'm setting up to say yours is not amazing. That's not what I'm trying to say. Like, but it's like it's this is just fun, there's not a lot of books that are coming out that people are really pushing that's like fun. Like it's always like it's almost like serious or just hardcore. There is fun in it, but I don't know. And again, I'm not trying to make a judgment call on anything, but all I'm saying is like this is just so much fun, and this is like the kind of stuff that I like to write as well. Like I harken back to when I'm a kid, and I like to write things that excite that's that kid is what wanted to make comics, and that's what I try to do when I make comics. Like that's where everything comes from, and I feel like that's what you're doing here. You're just having a blast making comics. It's a lot of work. It's hard work. I know. I've done it, but it's also pleasing, like the inner child. I don't know, as cheesy as that may sound.
Well, no, no. Well, maybe I should say, yeah, it sounds cheesy, wonderfully cheesy.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, because you have to harken back a little, even if it's for an adult audience. And with Gods and Gears, my intent was, 40-year-old dudes read it and they're like, okay, my kid's actually gonna like this one. Like,
Totally.
my kid, like, because I kind of gauge things by my nephew too. He's 15 now, and like the last 5 years, his comics experience was, he loved a few things at Marvel because they were Marvel characters, and he loves the movies. But then he was constantly disappointed with the comics, and I
Mm.
didn't project any of my dislike about modern books onto him. He had no clue about any of that. With him, I was just kind of like, whatever he liked, I'm like, hey, that's cool. Put it on your pull list. We'll get it, even if that guy's got me blocked on Twitter. But go ahead, get that issue. you know. Um,
Yeah.
so I let him form his own opinions, and he ended up about 2 years into going with me every week to the comic shop. He ended up in the back issue bins every week, and he would want to buy a couple things, but one copy of Frank Miller's Daredevil every time he went. And he never wanted to buy two. He just wanted to buy one copy at a time. And he would take it home and he would read it, and then he'd send me a text or whatever and just be like, oh, so good. It's like, it's so good. It's like, it's better than the TV show. It's so good. And that's kind of when he started seeing that, like, oh, one person can do something so much more amazing than 500 people at Netflix. Like, like one dude with a comic. I mean, like that. That's all it takes is one dude in a comic making a comic to just pull you in, and to pull somebody in. What, 40 years later? Like, he's pulling in this kid. So that was part of our goal. It wasn't to aim for kids. It was to seriously aim for all ages. Like exactly how like Claremont was writing, where he was like, no, I want the 40-year-old and I want their 12-year-old son to read it. Like, and I want them to take away different things. The dad's going to be like, oh, Madeline Pryor. Oh, you look nice this issue. Meanwhile, like 10-year-old me didn't notice that stuff at all. Like, I remember the first time people were saying like, oh, these women are so scantily clad. I was like, huh, I guess you're right. I didn't really think about it as a kid. They're just so cool looking.
Yep. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I've had the same experience with music too, because I grew up on like 90s hip hop. That was like my favorite thing, and I made that stuff as well. And you know, so much of it was gangster this, gangster that, or like, you know, money, or and then there's a lot of sex stuff in there too. Like a lot, even stuff that was supposed to be the positive stuff was filled with all
Mm-hmm.
kinds of sexual stuff. And now I listen to it and I'm like, oh, that's kind of gross and weird, and I don't know, like, but when I was younger, I just was like, I love this beat. It's so fun. Like, I don't know. I didn't really think of that part of it. Like, literally, I just was like, oh, I like how he rhymed this with that. Like, you know, I don't know. It's so weird.
Well, but I think it's okay to like and get into that stuff. It's just a matter of like how much it permeates into your life or your habits or whatever, like but if you're just listening, it's that's one thing. Same with like, I don't know, when I was young and angry, listen to some like super angry punk rock thing or this or that, and you're like, yeah, man, I'll never stop loving this. And I don't know, you're like 25, you're like, I don't really want to listen to that anymore. um, and so you, I think that happens though, but I think it's like, I don't know. I'm not so much against that stuff. I'm not saying you're being against that.
Right, right.
But I get what you're saying though, about like looking back and you're like, oh, that was
Yeah, yeah.
a little harsher than I thought that was, huh?
Yeah, like now I can kind of understand why my parents might have been questioning some of this stuff.
I know that's pretty funny to think about that stuff, where when my parents were right, even about like comics, like my mom would sometimes be like, if I was I bought a book for a friend once, and she was like, I don't think so and so's mom's gonna like this, and I was like, what are you talking about? And I went to a religious school, so my mom knew better than I did. I was just like, it's just an X-Men book, Mom, and my mom was like, it's titled Inferno and there's demons on it, and I let you read this stuff because I know it's just comic books, but some of the other moms might not. And then lo and behold, like the phone call later that night, Ryan gave this X-Men book to Aaron. What is this?
I know. I mean, I look at, even still, I look at it and don't notice it. Like I've said it plenty of times on my show. I'm a Christian and stuff, and so that's like a big part of my life. But I have many issues of like, Devil Dinosaur and Demon by Jack Kirby and all these like other like characters that are got all that kind of stuff in it, and I don't even think about it. And once in a while I get for a second a little self-conscious, and I'm like, I wonder if like I had a kid and they looked through that, would but they wouldn't probably notice it either, like but I don't know, like you're like, oh, I guess there's like a lot of weird stuff kind of in there, and whatever, I just enjoy it. But
Yeah, I guess I was lucky that my mom was even though we were religious, it was still like all of that stuff. Like, she was cool with movies. Like, even my dad was. It was really weird. My dad was really, really strict, but he had been a film director and a film student. And so he took me to see Clockwork Orange at a very young age, but not because it was, ooh, this shocking movie. He was like, I'm going to take you to see this Stanley Kubrick film. He's this excellent director. So, like, while this horrific stuff's happening on camera, my dad's like, so you see where the eye level is? That's the placement of the camera, so that you're feeling what she's feeling. And I'm like, yeah, I'm feeling what she's feeling, bro. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah,
I,
we had a weird aspect like that where it was like, you know, watch your language, mind your P's and Q's, church every Sunday, but don't tell anyone we saw Clockwork Orange.
yeah, that's actually, that must have been, maybe some intuitive things that you must have been kind of picked up on that really informed your comics eventually. I mean, cinematography is great for that.
Oh yeah, no, my dad played a big part in that. I mean, from the time I was like 10 or 11, I was actively practicing like panel to panel and sequential pages. I mean, they were bad, of course, but I was doing that, and I would just take it to him and let him critique it, and he would be like, well, here you should wait and have Wolverine's claws pop out here, and then stick them in the guy's throat, because then it'll be more of a surprise for the reader and him. And I'll be like, oh, you're right, okay. So
Yeah,
yeah, he would help me out tremendously with that, because storytelling. I mean, obviously, it's a big aspect of anything we do, but like I have friends that they are okay with storytelling. They're good enough to do the job, but they just love the drawing part. They just, oh, I love drawing the figure and the details and stuff. Where I love doing the building aspect of that. So the
understand.
figuring out the panels and the storytelling and that aspect of it. That's my favorite part.
Hmm, that's interesting. What about the design aspect? Because I feel like that's even a little bit different. But as I look at Gods and Gears, it looks really cool. And I also look at, um, just a few pages I've seen of Hammerella that you're doing art for, and I definitely see a lot of design in there. And I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are on design as it pertains to comics. And also, I didn't ask this earlier, but you mentioned the 9-panel grid. I'm curious what brought you guys to want to go that route.
That was actually just a result of when we condensed the story. It was too much story. I had to grid it out. I had to figure out the beats, and kind of had to even it out. Had to level it out everywhere. So the 9-panel grid became the base we built on. And obviously, it starts off with multiple pages of one panel as we move through a scene, and then it opens up to multiple double page spreads. Um, but then the main part of the story, it's built on the grid. Even though we'll break it up in different forms, it's still based on the classic 9-panel grid, and that was literally just a way to even out the story, because we had so much to tell.
Mm,
Because normally I probably wouldn't have done a lot of the action scenes. Like I think it's issue 3 where the zombie racers come after Jimmy, and they're not all individual 9 panels. There's some they open up into the 2 part of that, but if we had had more space, probably would have opened those up into like 3 to 5 panel pages, like big
mhm,
giant action scenes.
right.
But since we didn't have that, we tried to actually make use of that, and like, oh, let's make it feel like, even though he's out in a mud field, let's just make it feel like everything's closing in on him. So we'll keep those
Mhm.
panels tight. So it's just like as he's going through beat by beat. Um, so yeah, the 9 panels were a result of that. And what was, you had a question right before that that led to
Yeah,
this?
I was looking, even especially at the pages I've seen so far for Hammerella. But what do you think as far as design when you're approaching? How much do you think about design? What's a little bit maybe of your background of what you've learned about as far as that goes with comics?
Yeah, design plays a heavy part too, especially in the way I do my layouts, because I like I'm a fan of shapes, and I realized early on in my comic career that, like, when I'm doing my layouts and stuff, that shapes play a big part, not only in your comic book work. Like you've had Russ Leach on, so Russ is really great about shapes in his
Mhm.
figures and his scenes and
Yeah.
everything. It's all these shapes that are just so interesting, and then he does his fantastic rendering and shading on it. Um, so shapes play a big part, and I have a little bit of graphic design history. I'm not the strongest graphic designer. I usually try to lean on my friends for help for that. But I worked for like the Quicksilver clothing company for a while in my early 20s, and worked with some fantastic designers. So even the way they would graphically design like a campaign page or a poster or something like that, and the way they had things move through it plays a part in how I design my comic pages these days. Just because like I don't know why. I think we kind of it's my tendency, I guess, as an artist. Like I realized a long time ago I was not the John Buscema type, but I was more the Sal Buscema type. And
Okay.
Sal is much more blocky, and everything's about shapes and how these shapes fit into the panels and how they move pleasingly through the page, where Buscema is about how can he bring about emotion through dynamism and form, almost like Frazetta. I mean, Buscema is very much like Frazetta in that sense. And you look at them and you're like, wow, these guys are brothers, and one is they could be equally as pleasing. And one is this Thor that's got just rendering, and you can see the hairs and the lighting and the clouds behind him. And then you'll have Sal do a version, and it's colorful, and it's got these shapes that pop against each other, and rounds mixed with straight lines, and it's this design aspect used for the composition. And that's where I try to play. I use like, okay, so I use shapes and movement for my composition, and that's it ends up giving the pages like a really strong design aspect. And then it also even works so like color kind of falls into place in that sense. And that's just kind of been sort of a happy accident that I learned. It was like, oh, when I design the page a certain way, the colors kind of just fall into place. And there's still struggle, obviously. Putting colors next to each other changes everything, and there's headaches and all that. I don't mean to make it sound like, oh, it's easy peasy, but for me personally, if I have a heavy design element to my storytelling, the colors, yeah, they come easier.
Yeah. So you has there I don't remember, but have you guys done a novel, or are you going to?
That's actually one of the things we're going to be talking to Peter about, how to move forward, because no, we don't have any sort of graphic novel yet. And I should clarify, you fuzzed out for 1 second. That's what you asked about, right?
Yeah, because I
Okay.
know a lot of trade or graphic novel or whichever you want to call it.
Yeah. No, so originally the plan was like with Alterna is you publish your single issues, and then you do the giant and then the trade paperback. But Alterna is not going to be doing trade paperbacks anymore. And since we're in these trying times and things have changed up and everything, like we're not dealing with stores the same way. The whole marketplace has kind of shifted. Now we're looking at like, oh, do we crowdfund the trade paperback first, and then Peter distributes to the market after as single issues? So if that's the plan going forward, we actually kind of land in the middle where we're like, oh, we already had our issues out for one, and the Giant's not going to be. The Giant is sort of a teaser for the second series, like when issue 5 starts, so that won't be until then. So we're actually in the midst of talking with Peter on like maybe after Hammerella comes through, that like maybe we do a small campaign, like a smaller donation or amount campaign for like a nice shelf copy of Gods and Gears, perfect bound and stuff like that, because a lot of people are asking for one. And we could put it came out on a Wednesday issue in it, so it could basically be the 5 issues, and we could put some nice back matter in it, and we would only need to get the backing for printing because we don't have to. All the work is already done. So I think that's what we're gonna do. That's kind of something I'd like to do. Like obviously that's a little cart before horse. I want to see if we can get Hammerella backed first, people back Hammerella, and
Absolutely.
because the Hammerella one, we're asking for a little bit more than I don't know, some people may have expected, but that's going to help us like my number one thing with this is I want everything to go smoothly. So I want to devote all the time to the project. I don't want this to be a side project that I'm doing when I can and I'm having to do all these commissions or take on other work. I want to focus on this. It's also going to help us start issue 5 and 6 with Dean, and it's going to get us set up to like hopefully have an operation running just smoothly through 2021 so that we can be shipping. I want to turn my garage into like a shipping center so that this can kind of be a constant thing. Because like you said, I would like this to be the thing I do. Like I may have to do some design work or work with my brother's sign company or anything, you know, to pay the bills. There might have to be some other aspect because there always is something like that. But as far as creating comics, I would be totally happy just living in the Gods and Gears world for the next 10 to 20 years. You know, I'm 44.
Yeah.
I still have a lot of creative years ahead of me, but I want to have them planned out. I want to kind of give myself some direction. So I could see us doing Gods and Gears for a bit.
I mean, you know, it's the type of it's just the type of story that just lends itself to that. Like you can go anywhere with this thing. Like and it's really cool. And not only that, but I think you have a lot of people who really dig what you're doing. So it's like, yeah, you know, take advantage of put everything, and I don't mean in a bad way, but it's a good thing. Like take this opportunity and do everything you can with it. You know, that's what I feel like, you know, but it's not my thing. But yeah, I like where your head's at with that because hey, more Gods and Gears, I'm on board.
Awesome. No, thanks, dude. And it always sounds so cheesy, but I mean, sincerely, thanks to everyone. I mean, thanks to everyone watching too, and like the support and the sharing. Like each share, like I'm one of those people that like when I get that one more backer, I'm like, that was somebody shared to somebody that saw a thing and maybe retweeted, and then that person backed. Like, I love the way this all works and the way we can all support each other like this, like from thousands of miles away.
Yeah, totally. I feel like there's a bunch of other things we could probably talk about, but I keep forgetting to write certain things down. But that being said, you know, like once again, I just want to, you know, remind people. I mean, we've already said it, but this Hammerella thing, it's just looking pretty freaking awesome. Is the Hammerella like? Is that already confirmed? This is also going to be like an Alterna book
Yes, sir.
in newsprint. Okay, that's
Yes,
awesome.
sir. It's going to be the first Gods and Gears annual. So when it comes out through Hammerella, it'll be Gods and Gears annual #1.
Okay. And what is that what the giant is that you were saying, or is that something else different?
No, sorry. I should have said what that is. The giants, I should say they're not giant this way. They're just giant in that they're bigger, they're more issues, they're more pages than the normal issue.
Okay.
And those are at Alterna. That's sort of the replacement for the trade. It's all 4 issues of a series, or all 3 issues of a series. It's Mighty Mascots or something. So it's that collected in sorry, not a trade form, but a newsprint collection of the entire series.
Mm-hmm.
So it'll be like $4.99 or $5.99 for the collected giant.
Right. That's awesome. And I think I should have already known that. Now that you say that, I'm like, oh, I shouldn't even ask that because I know how they do that.
All good.
But hey, it's good because now everybody else knows. So also, what was the other thing? Oh yeah, the So how many pages is the? It came out on a Wednesday one because I haven't caught up to all the. It came out on a Wednesday issues. Even though I do love that series.
Yeah, we have a 12-page story in that, and it's sort of like a 0 issue. You can read it at any time, but it does a sort of a soft launch on the universe in general. And it's I won't spoil anything for you. I'll let you read it, but the gist of it is it's Ozzy, who is Eli's grandfather, who he mentions a lot, and we see him in a flashback, I think in issue 3 or 4. So it's him and his cousin Nuna, who's the old lady in the series that the boys visit, and the two of them go on a short adventure, and it takes us. They're supposed to be in a balloon race. They go do something else, and they end up on this adventure that leads them through all kinds of places, and we learn a little bit about the world, and we learn a little bit about them, and it's sort of a launching point for the universe.
Mm. That's awesome.
And I'm sorry, I got one more thing to add to that.
Yeah, sure.
That was also one of the things that screwed us up, was in the best way possible, was we had the series launching, we had started expanding it, and Pete came to me and he said, "Do you guys want to do a preview?" And it came out on a Wednesday, and throw 4, 8, or 12 pages of the series in there. And I was like, "What if we throw in something totally new and different?" And he was like, "Well, if you guys can get it done in X amount of days, or weeks, whatever." We had a short amount of time to do it. And I got in touch with Dean. I was like, "All right, man, this is it. We got time to do kind of what we always wanted. We got a publisher that's like, if you guys can get the story done and beat the press, then you can have it." And we're like, "All right, so let's do it." And we hammered this thing out and put it together. And I couldn't be happier with it if we planned it out for longer, because it's 12 pages, but it really should have been a 6-issue series. Like, we tell this giant story, and each page is kind of like a summary of an issue, that it could just be its own issue. But I think that's part of the fun with the Gods and Gears stuff, is we just kind of like, we grab onto you and we just kind of like shove you full speed by your collar through the story, and you're just like, ah.
Well, actually, that reminds me of a question I was going to bring up earlier. There is a lot of time things. I mean, there's time travel, and also just as far as the storytelling goes, like, you are just jumping back and forth in different parts, not through the whole thing, but there's definitely a lot of that kind of jumping from one point to another. Even there's one part where you got like the 9-panel grid, and like each panel is like 5 hours later, 1 hour later, 2 minutes. It's like and I kind of thought that was cool, because being a comic creator, those are the things that are like hard to figure out. Like, how do I transition from this to that? How do I like get somebody from this whole different dimension to another dimension and make it feel natural, but also tell a story right? And how was that part of it for you? I'm sure it was a challenge.
Oh yeah, because it's also one of those things that it is the fun side of storytelling. Like, oh, this will happen, and then this will happen, and then it's like, when you're making your notes, it's all fun, and then when you go to tighten up the script, that's when you're like, "Oh, wait a second, that doesn't work at all," and, "Oh, this is happening, and this should be happening," and yeah, and like I think I mentioned earlier too, like, that's one of the weird things about Gods and Gears, is I'm not only figuring out those little things for, like, oh, the boys while they're down in the jungle, it's like, okay, but what? So 10,000 years ago, this happened, and okay, does that play into this at all? And what about that thing that happened 100,000 years ago? Does that play into this? No. Okay, and so I've got to like keep like expanding my mind to take up like all the gods and the timing, and then come back down and be like, okay, so this happens, and then in the afternoon, how do I transition from this to that? And then it just becomes as simple as like a later that day.
Yeah, yeah.
You still have to have smooth visual transitions. Like, it's always nice to, if you're leaving a scene, to pull the camera back, and your characters are small, and then it feels like you're leaving. So you turn the page, even if it doesn't say later or the next day, you kind of get the vibe that it's somewhere else or a different time.
Yeah.
And that stuff we went over with the letterer and Pete, who was not so much playing full-time editor, but he would just kind of be like, "Oh, hey, you know what? I don't know if you said later too many times in 2 pages because we got to jump in time, or or maybe there needed to be one where there wasn't, or something like that. So that actually took the whole team. The whole team ended up having input on that, pencils,
Mm.
letters, publisher,
Wow.
just to make sure, because it's all about hitting that right cadence in any story.
Mm.
And I'll be the first to say I think I hit the perfect cadence for me, anyways. Perfect in 2 and 4, and I was off in 1 and 3. 1 and 3, we we had the most struggles, and 2 and 4, everything came together the tightest. So I'm
Okay.
going to take what I learned from what I feel were mistakes in 1 and 3, and what I feel was right about 2 and 4, and try to work it out for the next batch.
Yeah. And color can play a big role in time jumps and whatever jumps you need to go from scene to scene. You can make one kind of scene a predominantly a certain color scheme, and then the next one another one, and that helps the reader just visually like just automatically think, oh, okay, we're in a different place right now, or that's
Mm-hmm.
always a fun way to kind of help that along. But yeah, it's interesting. It's so interesting. Like people, when you decide like, hey, I love comics, I want to make comics, you don't think about any of this kind of stuff. But once you make them, you're like, okay, now you start to get geeky about it. That's why I'm glad I have this like show where I can ask these geeky like process questions sometimes, because you know it's important. Like that's the thing where you're like you're working and you're just like, I didn't really know that you had to think about this part. Like I just thought I was gonna make my comic, but I really like if I'm gonna make this readable, I gotta have make some decisions here.
Oh yeah. And then as soon as you show it to the first person, or hit send to show the first person, then you even realize, you're like, oh, I just realized 10 more things that are wrong with it.
Uh,
Um, and then you start making those adjustments, and then the notes come back from the people, and
you're like, I
uh,
already fixed that actually, but
yeah, yeah. I've typed that so many times, or I send a follow up email. I'm like, ignore the typos on page 2. I already found those. Like, uh, yeah,
totally.
stuff like that.
Well, comics are pretty awesome, and I'm loving what you're making here, the world you're building, your team and everything. So I'm glad you're gonna keep expanding with it. And everybody, again, like please, go back get the Hammerella book, get the Alterna books. I mean, I didn't even plug the because you demanded it, but you could go there and get the Gods and Gear books and stuff like that. You can go to alternacomics.com and get the Gods and Gears books. So I mean, I couldn't recommend it higher. Like this is definitely one of my favorite Alterna books, and that's saying something because there's a lot of cool Alterna books. So yeah, I mean, I again, please go check it out, go back it, help him get to his
Thank you.
his goal, and yeah, man, the stuff you had to say, and I mean, like I said, I love getting kind of deep into the weeds of this process stuff, and it's super interesting, especially since I feel like I'm trying to make similar kind of things, in my own way. So it's
Hmm.
helpful anyways, and I think there's a lot of people who are watching who, I mean, my audience is predominantly other creators, and I think they're probably getting some cool stuff from this too. So thank you, man, for coming on.
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, that's what I'm trying to do with my channel and stuff. It's, I try to sell product, I try to sell my book and stuff like that, but I've learned so much, like I said, over the years, and so many things. And I really like teaching and sharing knowledge, and inking something I have a specific uh, knowledge about, and a good way, I think, a good way of teaching it. So, yeah, I love the community that's happening and been happening on YouTube these last couple of years, of all of us like trying to teach each other and finding our own voices and making our voices for our channels, and things like that. So, and thank you for yours. I found you only recently in the last few months, but it's been really great. I was really tickled when you reached out to ask me to be on, because I was like, oh man, okay, so Marsha's like it's got this like great calm way of talking about comics, and it's very thoughtful and philosophical and stuff. So I was even telling my wife, I'm like, those are the kind of shows I want to get on. I want to get on shows like that with like people that are smarter than me asking me the questions that they're like, oh, he'll have an answer for this, and I'm like, hey, I do.
Yeah, I mean, I like that too. Like it's. I mean, obviously, that's the kind of show I'm making. It's really, I love picking. Again, like you have a lot of experience in this stuff, and I still feel like I'm still starting out. Even though I've done some things, but like, it's great. So the respect and all that is mutual for sure. So thank you everybody in the chat too. Like we didn't really address the chat a lot in this one. It's another one. Sometimes some shows you just kind of dig deep, and you don't. It's a little bit less of the let's have fun and chat thing. So although I think this was fun as well. So thank you for hanging in there, guys. Thank you, everybody watching on the replay. Please, share Hammerella and check out his books and his YouTube, all that stuff. Is there any specific thing you'd like to plug besides obviously Hammerella, like web, social media or something?
Well, you can find everything out about me at ryanwinn.com. I'm at Ryan Winn on Twitter, but everything you want to find out will be at ryanwinn.com. And that'll link you to the Hammerella page. That'll link you to my YouTube, all that stuff. And at 9 Pacific tonight, midnight your guys' time, I will have a Late Night Inks episode where I will be inking Iceman. You guys can ink along if you want. So feel free to join me there. I'm live in the chat. It's not a live episode, but during the premiere, I'm live in the chat, so you guys can ask me more questions there.
Awesome. Cool, man. Well, thanks again, and thank you, everybody. And I think that's it for this one. Hope you guys have a great night. Everybody.